the main point is that if you train a model that is generic, you need a lot of parameters because it has to learn from everything. Okay, but if you have a specific use case, and I believe that any company will, if they think about their final customer and how their product is fitting their final customers, probably is able to, let's say, constrain the LLM. Okay, and by constraining the LLM, I believe that you can first use a much smaller model. And then probably with a much smaller model, you can train that and fine-tune that with reasonable cost. Okay.
Disheng Qiu is VP of Engineering at Translated. Translated is one of the largest translation companies in the world, providing translation services for the likes of Airbnb, Skyscanner, Uber, and many others. Translated has been working on proprietary AI technology and tools for more than 20 years. It has an internal research team and it creates tools that power the work of tens of thousands of professionals. With Disheng, we will explore what it means to be an AI-first company. And we will talk about many things, including building AI in-house versus using APIs and tools, turning AI research into products, and the endless debate about AI empowering professionals versus AI stealing your jobs. Welcome, Disheng. Thank you for being here with us today.
I'm very happy to be here and also excited because I'm seeing refactoring from, I think, the first day that you published the first post.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. Thank you really. Disheng, you are VP of Engineering at Translated. So you basically live and breathe AI. I would say before it was cool even. And there are like a million things I want to ask you. But before we start, I have to make a disclaimer because I have worked myself at Translated for 1 year before I started refactoring. Actually, I quit my job at Translated to go full time with refactoring. It was a fantastic experience. But even before that, we had known each other for more than 10 years because we were co-founders of the same startup, of our startup. So having you today on the podcast feels a little bit like cheating, you know, but I'm really a big fan of the work you're doing. And so I can't wait to ask you more about it. So thank you again.
Actually, for me, it's the same because also for me, it's like cheating because I feel like being here because I know you directly. But I think we have done, and we are doing a lot of interesting stuff related to AI. So I think it's interesting to discuss about those points today. And then, if the audience like to ask me question, I'm here and very good, Constantine.
Yeah, the audio is better. Yeah. So excited to start. So the first thing I want to say is that Translated is doing a great job, is powering with technology some of the biggest companies in the world. But Translated as a company doesn't make many headlines itself, right? So my first question is very basic. That is, what does Translated do? If you can explain to us in a nutshell to create some context.
Yes. Translated, from the name, it's quite easy. We do translation. And I think the most interesting thing of Translated is that it's doing translation by innovating. And it's one of the most innovative company in the translation industry. Why? Because from when it was founded, has been designed to combine human with machines. Okay, now it's a trending topic because we have AI everywhere. But when Translated was built from, the initial website where people were asking for translation, has been designed to have AI in the middle of the process. Okay, we build the first solution to rank linguists, translators, so that we can match the request of a translation job to the best translator that we could find in our database. To now that we basically have our own machine translation engine that is supporting big enterprises, to solution that automatically sub or provide help use linguists to subtitle or dub content, video content, to LLM labeling. The all a lot of jobs that we cover, starting from a simple job that was working with linguists and helping linguists to be productive. And I think that is a really interesting thing to learn and to describe.
Yeah. So it's basically a combination of humans doing the work, so translators and linguists, and tools and AI that help them, right, to perform better, combining machine translation, so straight AI and machine translation software with translation done manually by humans.
Yes, exactly. If you think about another example, Google Translate, when they built Google Translate, the idea was let's translate content on the web. And the idea was to not use humans, just use machine translation and translate the new content from the web. In our case, when we build the machine translation, the idea is let's build a machine translation that can help humans doing their human translation job. And this actually seems the same objective of translating, automatic translating content, but it's completely different as a use case because when, for example, a linguist or a translator is doing his job, what happens is that segment by segment, they get the source content they want to translate and translate that on the target. So every segment they submit to the system provide a feedback to the engine. And obviously, we designed a solution that is adaptive machine translation. So basically what happens is that at each submit of the user, the engine, the machine translation engine is adapted with that content. So, for example, now if you use Google Translate, if it makes a mistake, it will always make the same mistake over and over again. In our case, if we make a mistake, the first time we make a mistake, you correct that. Second time, it will be perfect. And I think that is how we change in terms of paradigm of work.
Yeah, and another difference is that, as far as I know, it's not like this engine is used by final users who need a translation. I mean, maybe some do, but it's not like Google Translator, who is a consumer-oriented product. I mean, this engine is used by professional translators, right? As far as I understand.
Yes, we have two main use cases. For one use case is for professional linguists.
Yeah.
Obviously, professional linguists can be also LSP, that are basically agencies that work with linguists to make them more productive. And obviously, an adaptive machine translation can help a lot in this use case.
Yeah.
Our solution is also used by enterprises. And the enterprises can have different needs. One is to obviously work with linguists and help their productivity. And this obviously is something that they need, and they use the engine this way. Another use case is that they want machine translation that is adapted to their content.
Okay.
For example, if suppose that I'm saying a name, Apple. If Apple has a support center and they chat with their customers and they chat in all the languages, but they have the support center that support only in English, they need to translate all the content in all the languages to English and vice versa. So what does it mean? It means that they use a machine translation in the middle that can translate the content with their terminology, their brand, groceries, and so on. And by using Google Translate, Google has two solutions. One that is Google Translate that you cannot actually customize. Another one that is AutoML, that is a enterprise solution, but it's really, let's say, big because it's really costly, and to train the model, you need to build a lot of data that you take it and train the model. In our case, the engine is built adapted from scratch. So what does it mean? It means that as soon as you use it and you get the first feedback, then you send the first feedback, the engine improves. So you just have one endpoint that is, let's say, the static engine, As soon as you give a feedback, then the engine improves and the quality rise.
Okay. And this is being used, I mean, your model is being used by some of the largest enterprises, right? I saw the headline, it was maybe 1 year ago or so, that Translated had closed the largest contract in the history of translation with Airbnb for Translated all the Airbnb content, including like user reviews in all the languages throughout all the locales, right? Is it
Yes,
how it
yes.
works?
I think that this is some kind of pivotal change, because uh, typically people, when they use machine translation, it's more a push button where basically you see a content in a language that you don't know, you push a button to translate in my
Yeah.
language, and you read the content. Airbnb, we helped Airbnb to build a new approach that basically, instead of showing first the original content, we show the machine translated content. Why? Because
Yeah.
we are, first of all, confident with the quality. So I think that is the minimum bar of
Sure.
why they chose to have this solution. A second point is that often seeing a content in another language is a blocking point for a customer. No, for example,
Yeah.
if I'm buying a product and I see only reviews in German, my first thought is, okay, this product is not sold in Italy, or this
Yeah.
brand is not famous in Italy. So maybe it's
Yeah.
not working well. It's not famous enough, and I start to think about this stuff. No, while if you see the content on your language directly, I think that it completely change your way of thinking. And I was talking to a colleague, and he told me he got this experience when he was traveling with Airbnb, and being able to chat with someone that do not speak your language, and at a certain point meeting him, no, and understanding that you had a long discussion with him, and he doesn't know how to speak English. Actually,
Yeah.
it's really fascinating, right? Because
Yeah.
on one channel, you are free to communicate and you can discuss a lot of stuff from check-in to
Yeah.
experiences you can have there and so on, to one point where you see physically and the host maybe is not fluent in English and is
Yeah.
not able to
Yeah.
communicate well.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting and it's a very human problem that technology can solve. So I want to understand better how this works in the sense that we all know this is the year of AI, right? I mean, last year was also, and next year will be probably will be years of AI. But there are still just a handful of companies that are making their own models, right? Or even fine tuning models versus, I don't know, using stuff that exists or wrapping APIs. There is also this running joke about, most AI companies being nothing more than wrappers around some GPT, right? So Translated instead has been investing on their own AI models for many years now. So I was curious about your point of view about how do you think about this? That is, when do you think companies should create their own AI technology versus they should reuse at various degrees because it's not black or white, existing stuff. And I'm asking this because I think most companies today feel, the FOMO of they want to leverage AI. They want to use AI for good, either in their products or in their workflows, but they might not know what is the best way. If it is whether they should create this strong skill set in house, hire, a set of machine learning engineers, or treating it as an external resource that they can plug into what they have.
Yes, I think it's a really interesting question. Maybe let me start from the how translated builds a machine translation,
Sure.
and why we build that, and maybe that is an example, and I will formulate later my thoughts there. Now, if you think about the translation job, the fact that the linguist can start from a machine translation output helps a lot, no? Because it has
Yeah.
to possess it instead of translating from scratch. And from the start of Google Translate, actually, we used for many years Google Translate as a service. So we had a long relationship with Google where we basically were using Google Translate as a translation engine in our CAT tool. CAT tool is basically the tool where linguists get online and can work and translate content for us. And but then with the advance of technology and the first transformer model, we built Modern T. That actually is the first commercial product that was selling and using a transformer engine. Okay. And the really nice thing is that we had many months, many years where we were building our own engine and we were using an external service. And we decided to switch to our own engine when the quality was, in our case, was better than what we found on Google. And then from there, we started to sell also Modern T as a service, okay, as a standalone product, okay. So I believe that your question about when we should use API or when we should use services that already exist and when we should build in-house, I think that is a really good question. And I would say that probably, especially when you start a business or you are testing or validating something, more than 90% of the cases, I believe that don't make sense to build from scratch something, because typically it's really easy to find, let's say, almost state-of-the-art or state-of-the-art solution online with a lot of advantages. So you have less ramp-up cost. It's really quick to validate your idea. So, for example, if you think that, suppose that I'm a company, like I'm a chatbot company, and I start to think, okay, I need translation, okay? I can think, okay, I build a machine translation engine, but that will mean that you need to hire people, build that, and do a lot of stuff. But if you use a translation service, translation API, then you can validate quickly your solution. You can plug in your product, and in really few days, you have your own product localized in a lot of languages. Okay, this can be an example of translation, but can be classification, can be chat, can be any service that you want to serve. So it's a really quick validation. Cost typically is proportional because all API calls is typically proportional to how many calls you make. And obviously, if you are in validation step and you're a startup, you don't need high volume, or typically you don't need. You can validate your assumption, and then you can, let's say, worry about the scale up later. Okay. One thing to say is obviously about when you choose API, there are, let's say, a lot of cases where you cannot choose an API, okay, for several reasons. Okay, the simplest reason is that the volume are so high that it's too costly. Consider, for example, Google Translate. Google Translate, I think, as a standard rate is $20 per megabyte. Okay. If you think about, I don't know, Airbnb, but even now Amazon, bigger company, if they want to translate all the content in all the languages, it could cost hundreds of millions of dollars to translate all the content. So that's why they don't pre-translate all the content. Okay, so there is a cost to do that, and obviously above a certain level of cost, it makes sense to invest in your own team, to build your own technology that allows you to feed the service and improve the solution. Then another reason why people should decide to use and build their own solution is quality. In our case, I mean, at a certain point, we decided to switch to Modern T because on our side, our data was telling us that we were able to solve the translation problem in our case for linguists better than Google Translate, because in our case it was adaptive. Okay. So whenever you find let's say a constraint on the service that you're using, the API that you're using, that can be low quality it's not working well for a certain language. It's too slow. I mean, we know that, for example, GPT-4 is slow, and for real-time use cases, maybe can be cannot fit really well. Okay, and that's, I think, is another reason why people can decide to use and build their own solution. Another, I think, the option, the reason why people can decide to build their own models by security or by, let's say, strategically for the company, because they want to build an asset, or privacy. And why this? Because often for enterprises need to run AI on private data, on really copyrighted data that cannot send to OpenAI. Okay.
Yes.
And in that case, obviously, what the only choice that you have is to build your own models to train and basically hope to achieve those level of quality.
Yeah.
The main point is that it's not trivial.
Yeah. In fact, I think this is very interesting because when it comes to choosing between using an external model through an API, for example, let's say using the GPT-4 API versus training your own model with your own data, or even a little bit simpler than that, you fine-tune an existing model with your own data, but these are still very tough processes that may take a lot of time, a lot of resources. So it's not easy to prototype what the quality maybe will be. And so if your bottleneck is quality, I mean, if what you want to improve is quality, maybe you don't have an easy way to validate that you're gonna make it better by creating your own system. So how do you think about that? Is when you look at what you have, that is data, use cases, do you have some heuristics or quick thoughts about when it makes sense to invest in your proprietary technology versus adapting systems that already exist?
I think this is even harder question because
we keep
like,
getting harder and harder. That's how it works here. Yes.
It's like finding a math formula to decide when to use and build your own model. I think that's it's really challenging. I would say that especially if we talk about LLM, and we talk about large language model, the key element, I think, is data, because to any task that is like fine-tuning a model, specializing the LLM for your own tasks, means you have to have high quality data, okay? And probably also a high volume of those data, because you need to teach a model that it's good as a baseline to work on your content. Okay, let's think about the e-commerce that I was mentioning before. Suppose that you sell standard product, like commercial product, then that's easy because the GPT-4 has been trained with a lot of web content that probably can describe a smartphone, can describe standard products that can be found online. But suppose that your e-commerce is specialized in industrial products. Okay, there is no content on the web with those descriptions. And so what happens is that your LLM, if you use GPT-4, then probably as soon as the user can start to ask, okay, can I use this machine and plug in to my older version with another code of product, then GPT-4 is somehow useless, no? Because it don't know how to respond. Yes, because there is no training data for them to understand how to use that service, okay? So definitely, I think the key element is to have high quality data. So if I was the e-commerce, I have to have a database with a lot of products that are, let's say, non-standard product that I have in our database, with their description, with how people can use that product and so on, and try to use these as a training data or a fine-tuning data for the LM. Okay, so I think this is crucial point. Then second point, obviously, is to have AI expert, someone that can work with LLM, have experience in fine-tuning LLM.
Yeah.
I'm saying this why? Because when someone says, I can take a new graduate student and give him this data and ask him to fine tune the LLM. I think the problem here is that because it's a large language model, and by definition, to fine tune and train one of those models, you need a lot of resources.
Yeah.
We are, I think, in a setting where it don't make sense to, let's say, get a cheap machine learning engineer because he can probably waste several $100,000 in just few fine tuning. Okay, so
that's just
the
to make
bar.
it clear, that's the ballpark, right? I mean, if you want to fine tune an LLMs to your own data set, so is that the ballpark of what you need to expect to spend, like
Let's
$100,000?
say it
It
depends a
depends
lot. It
on the
depends.
data, I
Yes, it
guess.
depends a lot on how much data you have, because consider that the cost of fine tuning is proportional to two dimensions. One, the parameters of the model. So if you choose to use a 7 billion model, it's far different from using that with a 70 billion model,
Of
because
course,
one
yeah.
maybe is 10K, the other one is 100K, of course. Okay.
Okay.
Then that is the first dimension. The second dimension is the number of tokens. So how big is the data set that you send to the model? Okay.
Yeah.
So depending on these two dimensions, you can somehow predict, what is the cost of fine tuning. And obviously, based on that, also think about if it is worth having, let's say, cheap machine learning engineer that has less experience, or someone that has a lot of experience. Personally, I think that if someone is serious in LLM, they need to invest in the team, invest in seniority, because it's easy that during the research activity, you fail 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, I saw research teams that failed even 10, 15 times until a certain point they were able to find a good way to train, fine tune, and get the final model that was better than the baseline, let's say.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, because I think many companies do not realize that first it's a very costly process, because I get it that you say it depends on the amount of data, but we are also saying that it doesn't make sense to fine tune unless you have huge amounts of data. So, right, so it's never less, the cost is never less than some threshold, right? And then also the fact that this is a risky activity. So you may train and spend a lot of money and fail, right? Because they say these models do not converge, right? They do not get to an outcome that is higher quality than the base model for your purpose.
Yes, yeah, I heard stories about, companies training models, I think for something like 2 months, 3 months, and at a certain point, finding that the model was not converging. Uh, training for 3 months for, I don't know, probably 10, 20 servers with 8 A100, 8 H100, and discovering after 2, 3 months that was not converging. I think that it's really crazy in terms of cost. No, so I think that is definitely something to consider. Obviously, one compromise that you can, as I mentioned, is proportional to the parameter of the model. So you can decide, okay, let's start smaller. We start from a smaller engine with less parameters. I try to make that converge. If that converge, I'm more confident, and so I increase slightly, and one step up after another, you get from 7 to 10 to 14, and so on. And I think that is probably the best approach to start with LLMs.
Yeah, that's very sensible advice. So you may validate these on models that are with lower
Yes.
number of parameters, and then scale if things are promising.
Yes, yes. For example, now 17 billion, if the 17 billion parameter needs 3 months, no?
Yeah.
We're saying that probably the 7 billion maybe needs 9 days. Okay.
Yeah.
And obviously, if something can complete in 2 weeks, it's much, much better, especially at the beginning, during the
Yeah,
research
of
phase,
course.
when you need to understand what is the quality that you need. And
Yeah.
obviously, when we talk about quality, you also have to build your test set. I think that
Yeah.
is really important because it has to be representative of your final use case. No,
Yeah.
I saw a lot of time people working with public test sets, saying, "Oh, this solution is great," and then applying on their product and find that it's not working well. Why?
Yeah.
Simply because the test set is like public with different content, while
Mm.
your reality it's like chat content, and the chat content people start to write and have typo and all this kind of stuff, and the
Yeah.
engine basically make mistakes.
Yeah. That's very interesting. There are a lot of moving parts that need all to work for this to make sense in the end, as opposed to using models that already exist out there. So this conversation was really interesting, and I wanted to understand better how it works for translated from an engineering organization point of view. That is, I know you have researchers in house that work on AI models and AI research, and then you have to translate this into technology that goes into products that get used by sometimes professional users like translators, other times even the general public. And as you know, also OpenAI has this, dual structure where it has a research track, let's say, and then a product track that productizes what comes out of research. But it doesn't look easy to me, because it's two different types of work completely. Researchers are different from product people, and also the way research happens is different from products. So how does it work for you?
I think also here this one is challenging. I'm not sure if the board, I mean, this one is challenger or the previous one, but I think this one is tough. I have to say that, especially when now we put people that are from the research together with the
Yeah,
product, it's easy to mess things up. No, first of all, they come from different background, maybe.
yeah,
They also typically have different objectives, right? Because someone that works on new research has let's say, a long vision, and they try to think more a long-term solution, trying to think
mm,
about how can I improve the state of the art and build, I don't know, an advancement in machine translation, a new feature that they can use to improve here or improve there, no?
yeah,
And also, researchers typically think about publications, while
yeah,
if you think about the product and product teams, production teams, obviously they are really completely in the opposite side in some fields. So they obviously don't think about publications typically. And often their KPI is like really a business KPI, like a conversion rate of the product, load time of a page, response time from the customer, and so on. Okay, so
yeah,
it's
sure.
always a product and a business KPI that drives a production team. Okay, um, and um, and also another point is that typically production team works in sprints, and
Yeah,
with the idea that they need to have quick iterations where they can get some deliverables, some results quickly. Okay, while obviously research team, because they think about long term and the long term research, often it's not really fitting well in this way of thinking.
mm,
So I think this is really challenging. At Translator, we have typically a product team, but we also have a research team that is involved in, let's say, some activities that is purely research. So we have a research project from European projects. We have older collaboration with research centers and so on. That, let's say, is purely research.
yeah,
Then I think we can come, if I try to distill, what
yeah,
my experience here, I have to say we can consider two use cases. Okay, one where basically the product team and the production team has a clear need of a AI component that needs research, and I think this is the easiest use case, no? Because, for example, I need a piece that is able to classify a text with a certain level of quality. Because if it is above this quality, then I have a really good product that can improve the productivity of a team.
Yeah.
If it is below this threshold, I can say, okay, it's not good enough because I'm ruining the experience of the production team. Okay.
Yeah.
So, thanks to this clarity, I think for the research team, it's much easier to try to achieve these results. Okay.
Yeah.
So, for example, as I mentioned, if it is a classification task, I can give a clear guideline to the team saying, look, I have this data set, I have the training data, I have the test set.
Yeah.
For this test set, I need to reach this level of precision, this level of recall for this classification. And that is can be binary, can be multiple label, and so on. And so we, in this way, decouple the work from the production team, product team, and the research team. So what happens is that we build a roadmap with the research team. We say, okay, we can finalize this in 1 quarter. Okay, after a quarter, we review the R&D activity, and if the model is above the threshold, then success. We ship the product, and we have everything live. If it is not good enough, then the product team can decide, okay, I can back up in a third-party solution. I can use something that I can find online. And the R&D can have another iteration where basically they try to improve and get above that threshold.
Yeah. So this is product driven.
So
in this
yes,
case.
product driven.
Completely.
Yes, I think this is completely product driven, and also it's the simplest use case, I have to say. Why I'm saying that this is the simplest? Because I think that there are a lot of other use cases where it's hard to define the boundaries and hard to define what is your goal for each step of your product. I make another example now. If we talk about the modern T and we talk about machine translation, the main point is that it's not possible to define a product team that is not also a research team, no? Because during the release and the improvement of modernity, we do product feature, but we do a lot of research also to improve the machine translation. And so somehow we have two teams that have worked together, really almost as a single team. So we have a group of work with engineers, with AI, with data scientists that work on data, so that it's really easier to have a quick iterations. And also, it's really easy to come up with innovation. I give you an example, no? Because as I mentioned before, we have an adaptive machine translation, and that I think it's one of the key elements of Translated since many years. But from there, recently we launched a new product inside Modernity that is Human the Loop. Okay, how does it work? So basically, the idea is that when you are an enterprise and you need machine translation, typically the process is like this. You use a machine translation, you discover some issues with your customer, and you try to fix them. Okay, so you send to human translators, correct those sentences, and then if you use us, we can take these sentences and automatically update your engine. If you use AutoML or other, let's say, custom models, you need to build the training data, send this training data to the third party. The third party will fine-tune and build a new model. And this has been done by the enterprise, okay, by our customers. With Human the Loop, the idea is that instead of doing this, instead of asking the customer to select the sentences, correct them, and so on our backend, we do everything without any input from the user, or almost any input. And I'm not trying to explain. The idea is that you use our machine translation. You say, I want a certain level of human revision on top of the machine translation, let's say 1%. What we'll do is that automatically from the content we receive to be machine translated, we will review them with humans. And we have an algorithm behind that will rank the content, select only the worst sentences to be human reviewed. And by correcting these sentences, what happens is that the engine will improve day after day. Okay. without any and almost any input from the user, because the only thing that the user has to set is the threshold of the human in the loop. Okay, and I think this product is fascinating because somehow it came out from our activities between a combination between product, data scientists,
Research.
AI,
Yeah.
and our interaction with our research and our interaction with our customers. Because by talking with them, by understanding their pain, we come out with this solution. I believe that this kind of product is hard to come out from just a product team without all the research, all the data science
Yeah.
activities. And it's hard to think from the research point of view because obviously they say, oh, I improved the engine and that's it, no? While
Yeah.
the combined view, I think it's something that it's really fascinating because it's fitting well
Yeah.
the use case of our customers.
So basically, if I had to take a lesson from this, we are saying that there are cases where we are lucky, let's say, and we can derive research and improvements in technology from the product perspective, because the product knows exactly what it needs. It knows probably that it can be done. That's another, question mark. But there are cases where we can say that in advance, and you go in that direction. But there are also other cases where it's more like the research that drives what can be done, which the product cannot know by itself, basically. And you can only get to a good result if you keep people close together, working together, and work with the customer, close feedback loop. Uh, because
Yes.
otherwise, if you treat people like silos and departments like here's the research, here's the product, they don't talk to each other unless there is something very specific to pass around. If you work like that, you might miss out on a lot of improvements that require the whole group of people to work.
Yes, yes, and obviously, as I mentioned, it's really easy to mess things up because by combining people that has different experiences, different background, in the same team, working together, and also get in touch with customers, it's really challenging, no? Because
Yeah,
I don't know if you had experience, but engineers reply or researchers replying to customers, I think it's something that they
yeah,
don't
it's
don't
risky.
want to. Yes, let's say it's risky. Yes, not because I have a PhD. I work a lot with researchers, and I also work a lot with customers. It's not about no, I don't trust people. It's just the philosophy of our company is we believe in humans, so it's our motto. But I think the main point is that researchers tend to speak in a different language from the
Mm,
customers that
yeah,
speak different languages from product teams. That's why I think this can be done with the right people, with the right setup, with the right organization, so that the interaction probably with the customer is managed by someone from the product team or someone with experience that can then understand how to communicate with internal teams and so that the internal team can have their own routine and work together. So it's challenging, but I believe that in our case it's working well.
yeah. No, that's really fascinating. And so one of the things you have said that we believe in humans, right? And then you have mentioned before human in the loop. So one of the themes of this chat has been using AI to empower people at work. You work with professionals, and one of the things that are peculiar, I think, about Translated is that you have been combining this human work with machines and software for many years, even before AI was a thing in the mainstream. So I wanted to pick your brain about this whole AI versus jobs debate, which has obviously two sides. I would say one more optimistic and one more pessimistic, because we all agree that AI is changing how people work and it's going to change a lot of our job landscape. But you can see this from an optimistic angle, that is, AI is empowering people and making them more productive. So more productivity equals more wealth, and so everything would be fine. Or you can take it from another angle, that is saying AI can now do stuff that before that people would do, and so it is gonna take some people's jobs, and it's going to be challenging because people will lose their jobs, etc. So you have a privileged point of view about this because you are seeing both angles. So what are your thoughts about this?
I have to say that now, as you mentioned, translated philosophy has been always to augment human productivity, to help humans to express themselves, so that the AI can, let's say, support us in uh, doing the job that is less creative. Okay, for example, if you think about translation, if you use machine translation as a scratch, the idea is that instead of not saying, okay, the simplest word, how you translate the simplest word, you start to think, okay, the translation is this, but the user wanted to say this, so maybe I can go beyond the simple translation. Okay, so I think that in our case, our philosophy is really the idea that AI can support and augment humans' capability. Okay, and I believe that for the translation industry, we are really far from the case where really the machine can do everything. I just give you a few numbers because consider, for example, an enterprise, that spends something like 100 million in annual budget in marketing. It's something that it's quite common. For localization, they typically spend something like 1 to 4% of that budget. Okay.
Yeah.
So what's the point here? The point is that if you want to save 1 million in localization, but you can risk to mess up the 100 million because you
Yeah.
made a mistake in translation, and there is a long history of localization perks and the mistakes
Yeah.
that all the companies, many companies did. There are actually good translation, literal translation, but when you get to a point where you have your campaign in that country,
Yeah.
there is also a culture bias that will drastically change how people perceive your brand. Okay,
Yeah.
and I think there is no scenario where a marketing team will say, "I don't want to spend 1 million in localizing the content with a good quality because so I can I risk
Yeah.
to waste 99 million in marketing." Okay,
Yeah.
so I think this is crucial. And the second example is that if you think about these companies, typically this 1 million is spent not just for the translation, it's spent for translation, revision, and even a third pass of revision. Why? They want to have the certification that the quality is the best that they can achieve. Okay, so in my experience, all the enterprises that get to machine translation, they typically think that that content is low, let's say, value. Maybe they have a lot of that content, and then they use the machine translation.
Yeah.
Okay, so I really believe that for the translation industry, we are going to improve the machine translation engine, and there is a lot of discussion about singularity and so on to be able to translate as good as translators. But then, as I mentioned, we have the revision, language leads, and so on to be sure that the quality is good enough. Okay,
Yeah.
and as a company, we also have this philosophy of whenever we improve the productivity of the linguist, because we improve the machine translation, we have a revenue share approach. So basically, the idea
Okay.
is that by improving the productivity of the linguist gets, let's say, X% of improvement in productivity, so they can actually get more money for the same time that they are working. And in the same case for us, the same example for us, because we, by improving the engine, we get a percentage of the revenue share. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look, I saw some questions from the chat. I don't know if you want to.
Yes, we can pick them up. So there was a question from Mike and then one from Andrea. So the first question from Mike is, I read it out loud. So in your experience, is it better for validation? I think this comes back to our discussion about the models and the translation. So is it better for validation to be done on the user side or on the translator side? Could there be a problem with influencing the model based on a particular context compared to creating a model that works universally?
Good question. I think that the golden egg now here is always to test the model with the final use case. Okay, I think that
Okay.
is definitely the best way to test a model. I'm saying this why because for example, working to have a universal model that is, let's say, the best engine ever, sometimes it's not possible. Okay, because I give you an example. For the translation, I think it's something that I can give a really quick example. If you think that, for example, now that I want to build the universal machine translation that is like best in any use case without, let's say, knowledge of the customer, this is tricky. Why? Because often you have translation that is good for a certain customer, not good for another. Okay,
Yes.
because for the branding. Okay, for example, people can choose that in Italian they are really a high level brand, and they want to talk with the customer in informal way. I mean, I don't know. I
Yeah.
just to give an example. And there are other brands that they want to be really like young
Hmm.
communication, and they really need to communicate like with slangs and with
Yeah.
no
Different tone of voice completely.
yes, different tone of voice. The main point is that a universal engine there will not work because in one case will translate in a tone that is not fitting well the branding
Yeah.
of the company. So definitely, I think the only way to measure the quality of the model is to get in the final use case, build a good test set there that is representative. So randomic is enough, it's good.
Yeah.
Get a big sample randomically and use that as a test set.
Yeah. Great answer. So I'm picking another question which I've read before, and I love it from Andrea, who is saying that the cost of developing, fine tuning, or God forbid, training whole LLMs makes it hard for developers to play with them. So, except for a few exceptions, most big techs also keep their model very private. So, given all these premises and all the also incredible costs that we have talked about before, what opportunities do you see for small or relatively small companies or source communities to, I think, create innovation or work with these models?
Um, okay. Really good question. I think this community has a really high bar of questions. No, I think that it's really a good question because definitely, I give an example also of translator. Now we are working on LLMs. The main point is that it's hard to challenge these big enterprises. No, so
Yeah,
definitely, in our side, it's not smart to say, okay, the first thing I will do is to train from scratch a new LLM
yeah,
because that would mean investment of hundred millions of
yeah,
dollars probably. Um, I think, as I mentioned before, there are different paths that you can follow. Consider that even in GPT-4 now, it's really big, but because it has been trained for a general purpose. Now, going also back to the question from Mike, the main point is that if you train a model that is generic, you need a lot of parameters
mm,
because it has to learn from everything. Okay, but if you have a specific use case, and I believe that any company will, if they think about their final customer and how their product is fitting their final customers, probably is able to, let's say, constrain the
yeah,
LLM. Okay, and by constraining the LLM, I believe that you can first use a much smaller model,
mm, 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 mm.
um, and then probably with a much smaller model, you can train that and fine tune that with reasonable cost. Okay, obviously it's not something that because when I was a student, I learned AI. It was not a training of I don't know few minutes. and
Yeah.
in my laptop, no? And
Yeah.
that was training of AI solutions. And obviously, that is no cost, no? While here, even this small test needs an investment of, I don't know, several, I mean, 10, 50, $60,000 probably to
Okay.
get a reasonable result. But I think it's something that can be achieved.
Okay. So you are saying that the way forward for startups and open source communities and in general people who have less maybe less data and also less money than big tech is to find use cases for niche models, smaller models that are, but the models that accomplish a specific use case very well, and so they can attack that as opposed to trying to innovate on general purpose super big models that will always be something that only the OpenAI or Google of the world can achieve.
Exactly. Yes. I give you another example because, for example, we as a translator we have we have several products outside the standard product of machine translation. And for example, one product we have is a compressed model. Okay,
Okay.
we build this model because some customers want really quick API, fast responses, and P99 that is below 200 milliseconds. Okay,
Okay. Okay.
and what we did was instead of having a bigger model, no, that is our standard machine translation, we compressed this model and fine-tuned for specific use cases.
Okay.
And actually, what came out was that the smaller model was able to beat the bigger model in those use cases. Okay, I
Okay.
think this is somehow the lesson learned. You can really, if you're, let's say, the big company works with 70, 100,
Billion.
1 trillion parameter,
Yeah.
probably with one order, even more of one order magnitude less parameters, you can, for your specific use case, beat the standard model.
Yeah. I think this is a great insight. So, Andrea, there is hope. So we will try this. So I want to go back a little bit to the to what you said before about working together with professionals, with translators, and making them more productive and sharing revenues with them, right? I think that's a healthy way of working. I mean, a healthy synergy between the human work and the AI work, but it doesn't always happen. We are seeing many examples of AI models that take data from that is created by professionals, and then there is no collaboration between the company and the professionals. I mean, I'm thinking of diffusion models and things like Midjourney takes illustrators' work, and illustrators are mad, of course. So, do you think that the way forward is keeping humans in the loop, like you're saying? So building ways of doing business that makes people who create the data, at least at the professional level, benefit from the models that are created with them. So do you envision other companies working like Translated do?
Yes, I believe that that is the right direction. The reason why I think about that is that suppose that you're an enterprise. Typically, enterprises are those companies that spend big money on
Yeah,
on those activities. And the main point is that suppose that you're a company that you're using GPT-4 for your chat support. Okay,
yeah,
and suppose that you use that, and it's really easy that GPT-4 setup can mess up. Okay, why?
yeah,
Because it's true that you can give it some constraints, but the end user can actually still ask, for example, the model. I don't know, if you are a certain brand, they can ask the model, look, what's the problem with your brand? And the
yeah,
system, if it is not trained on that, will start to answer from the data that he had. Okay,
yeah,
so we'll say, look, I have people complaining because I sold a fake product. Okay,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
with your chat, so with your brand name, and that
Yeah.
is it's crazy. And I heard about companies running a pilot with the GPT-4 as a chat support, and at certain point said, no, we cannot use that because, as I mentioned, when you scale the business, you have a lot of people asking questions. You find all kind of questions, no?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then obviously the that is exposed as a product of the brand. So going back to the question, the main point on my side is that to have a right quality level on those LLM, on this AI solution, we always need a human that can, an internal team of professionals can review this content. In our case, it's linguist for translation, but for LLM, I believe it's still the same. For if you want to use chat, probably you need to review continuously the quality of those chats to ensure that you don't mess up the content.
Mm-hmm.
And you are the guy that finds the issue, not the customer. I think this
Yes.
is crucial because if the
Yes.
customer finds the problem, it's already too late
It's
because
too late.
he's getting a bad experience. Yes.
Great answer. So, Disheng, thank you so much for this. Thank you for being with us today. It was a great chat. It was a pleasure, really.
No, thank you, and really happy to be here. And I mean, if you have other questions, I'm available, and we can also discuss in the community.
Yes, Disheng is a long-time member of the community. So, if you have further questions or you think about them later, you can write them under the thread and tag Disheng, and we can continue chatting there. So, for now, thank you everyone who showed up. Have a great rest of your day, and see you soon.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.